Rob Bertholf here with what we will find is a tipping point in Adventist history. I don't think we can truly understand at this point what just happened recently. I want to share something that may help all of us understand what's unfolding here, but first I'll explain what the message was. Mark Finley, most of us recognize him. He's an early majority voice in Adventism that just publicly affirmed that the final generation message is biblical, and that God will have a people who stand loyal, obedient, and victorious through the faith of Jesus. Now again, this is a massive tipping point because for decades the truth has been resisted, softened, or pushed in the margins. But when a voice from the center finally says it out loud, it signals a shift, that heaven is moving and the message is to be in the open. This is, again, a massive tipping point. But to understand this, we must discuss the adoption bell curve. I think most of us are familiar with this curve, but I think applying it here will help us understand really why we're having this conversation right now. Truth does not move through a community all at once. It advances in waves, and it begins with a small handful of those who see it early, then a slightly larger circle who will embrace it while it's still unpopular. And then, only after time, resistance and testing does it reach the broader body. So if we think through this, the message of righteous by faith, and I will be doing a stories on what is last generation theology, but it's righteous by faith. It's the third angel's message. We all know the three angels' messages. It's the third of the angel's messages. So it all starts with innovators. When we look at Adventist history through the lens, this pattern becomes really clear. Our pioneers were the innovators who saw the three angels' messages in its full context, starting with Ellen and James White, Stephen Haskell bringing that also into view. Moving into the second generation of Adventism, we saw it again repeated with H.E. Jones and with Wagner. I'll do a follow-up video more with the timeline, but what I want to point out is really how the early adopters coming in next. Men like Haskell, Andreasen, Whelan, Short, and many others, as you see on this list, the ones who carried the truth when it was costly. Many of them were sidelined, misunderstood, or flat out pushed out. And it's not accidental. Whenever a message threatens Satan's last stronghold, he mobilizes every possible pressure to silence it. And more than a century, this message never crossed into the early majority. It lived there on the sidelines. It survived through independent ministries, small circles of study, scattered pockets of faithfulness. The institutional center remained largely cautious, vague, or silent until now. A mainstream voice has stepped forward. It's a signal that something in the prophetic timeline has shifted. The early majority does not move until the environment changes. So what's changed? We saw some early permission signals by Ted Wilson with some Spirit of Prophecy quotes, and yet nothing moved. And now Mark Finley has given a public affirmation through a recent video that underscores last generation theology, and even tying his name to that term, which has always been a term that has been very much pushed back against. In fact, a term that was not even created by those who believe in the three angels' message, the message of righteousness by faith. This was almost a derogatory term that was placed on this group as a way to marginalize or minimize them. And now with Mark Finley accepting this label on himself, this is a major shift. Those who've carried this banner for decades are now being joined by voices who would never have spoken or had the courage to take a stand. What I think we're going to see is that there's going to be a lot more conversation. I think we're going to start to see the early majority now take hold of this fully, and even passing this into the late majority. Because God often uses these kind of safe voices to break the silence. When someone like Mark crosses that line, it signals that the shift has happened. And suddenly those who hesitated now feel permission to speak openly what they've only held privately. These very conditions that move the late majority will adopt the message only when it becomes really expected globally, when their pastors and members begin to ask for clarity, when the General Conference speaks more openly and more consistently, and when the pressure of prophecy makes neutrality impossible. In other words, when the environment changes, they will finally step onto the stage, and these late majorities will need to then take a stand one way or another. What we'll find, though, is that there is going to be some pushback. there has consistently been pushback. I don't want to necessarily share who this message came from, but a prominent source recently gave this commentary. It will not be easy for the seminary faculty to attack Mark Finley. Evangelism is the ticket stardom to Adventism, not doctrinal degrees and trained scholarship. Mark Finley has vastly more influence than the church, than even the new General Conference president. And with this new public statement by Mark, the momentum is definitely with the last generation message. Institutional voices on the other side will find themselves seriously handicapped now. Certainly, it will be far more respectable to come out for last generation theology, now that Mark has publicly owned and endorsed the label. For Mark to say so clearly in the sermon that sinless living is possible in a sinful human nature demolishes at its root the very case against last generation theology. And so again, I don't think we can really even grasp the importance of how impactful this message will be. And so for that, I ask that you go watch the video from Mark Finley and see what a very clear and concise message was given. I'll be following up this series myself with some additional information on what is last generation theology and how the timeline has happened from that. But for now, I recommend just watching what Mark has said and recognizing that times are shifting, and this truly is a powerful tipping point in Adventist history. May God continue to lead in his work.